Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, everyone, and welcome. My name is Gökçe Okulu, and I serve as the Climate Adaptation Program Director at Development Workshop, and I will be your host today. And it's a pleasure to have you with us for the launch of this Contributors to Development Program Digital Webinar Series. First and foremost, a little bit of housekeeping. Please try to keep your microphones muted during the session. Our assistant Mariam is here with us, and she may mute participants if needed to ensure a smooth flow. And we will also share the registration form in the chat. If you haven't registered yet, we kindly ask you to do so for follow-up communication and upcoming webinars. After Andrew's presentation, I'll start with a few questions and then we will open the floor to yours. So we will be together for about 75 minutes, and please use the raise hand function for your questions and I'll give you the floor one by one, and please don't be shy. We would really love to hear your thoughts and questions. The webinar and discussion will be conducted in English as its nature, so we would appreciate it if you could also ask your questions in English, and thank you for your understanding. So before I give the floor to our special guest Andrew, I'd like to briefly take you back to where this journey started. The Contributors to Development Kalkınmaya Katkı Verenler Programı was initiated by the Development Workshop in 2012. With a very simple but powerful idea: to bring together the life stories, experiences, and accumulated knowledge of people who have dedicated their lives to advancing development and driving social and environmental change across different contexts, and to share these with younger generations. Over the years, the program has brought together inspiring individuals from diverse fields such as rural development, environmental protection, social policy, and community-based work. So, as you can see on the screen, allow me to briefly introduce some of these remarkable contributors. Carol Zwallow and Ayşe Kudat in social development, Yücel Çağlar with his lifelong commitment to... Okay, I'll keep going. Can you mute? Mariam, thank you. Yücel Çağlar with his lifelong commitment to voluntary work and rural environments. Tansu Gürpınar in environment and sustainable development. Güler Yücel, whose life story reflects a deeply personal engagement with development. Carla Marina Marchese, known as an accidental beekeeper bridging design and ecology. And in addition, the program has also documented and shared institutional stories such as Tiresut Cooperative and the Harvard University Cooperative, highlighting collective models of impact. All these books are available on our website, by the way. You can download them, or you can just come by to our office and then grab them. At its core, this program has always been about intergenerational learning and encouraging young people to become active actors in development processes. However, as contexts evolve, so do the ways we connect, learn, and share. And today, here we are on Zoom, bringing together people from diverse backgrounds, experiences, and also locations. As I said, we had 68 registrants so far, and some of them were from Japan, from other countries. So we've seen some diverse participation. Hopefully, there will be more when during the process, and then when we have more webinars, and then when you are more familiar with this. Last year in November, together with Ertan Karabıyık, our General Secretary, who is also here as one of our participants, we visited more than 20 institutions in the United States to build international partnership, exchange knowledge, and explore new approaches to advancing civil society and the development work in a rapidly changing global context, while also identifying new funding opportunities. During this time, we had the opportunity to engage with a wide range of experts, and it became clear to us that this knowledge, experience, and perspectives we encountered at that time should be shared with you in Turkey. And we decided to open a new space with within this series, and then with the support of the Switzerland Embassy, who are not here today, but they'll be joining us in coming webinars too. So we were able to bring this initiative to life as an open, accessible, and international connected learning space. And we are having the recording of the sessions, and hopefully this will be available on Development Workshops YouTube page as well. So you will be reaching out to the content later on too. So this is how the Contributors to Development Digital Webinar Series emerged. And through this series, we aim to bring together international experts, students, young professionals, civil society practitioners, creating a space where global discussions meet local realities and ideas potentially turn into action. And today marks the beginning of this new phase. And we're happy to start this journey with you. So enough with me talking, and let me introduce dear Andrew to you before I give the mic to him. Andrew Friedman is the Director and Senior Fellow of the Human Rights Initiative at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. He's a lawyer who has previously worked in USAID, various UN agencies, and NGOs on human rights, development, anti-corruption, and good governance. Andrew also teaches courses in international law and human rights, and today our topic is the value of civil society in policy decision making. Over to you, Andrew. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Gökçe. I just really appreciate the invitation to be here. I think this is just a truly fantastic effort. I'm really glad you all are putting it on, and honestly, I'm just quite honored to be a part of this iteration of it. I'll say just kind of for the group, Gökçe and I actually met when her and the Development Workshop were in Washington, so I got a chance to hear about a lot of the work they were doing, and they just do fantastic things. So that's my brief plug for the organization. So again, thank you, Gökçe.
Thanks.
I think this is just an amazing opportunity for exchange and as well as presentation. So I wanted to emphasize that from the get-go. There's a fairly large time period for Q&A. So I'd really like to hear from you as well about, how you think this process works, and probably more importantly, how you think it should work, because I'm here to talk about how civil society is engaged in the policy process, and there's just always room for improvement on that. The civil society voice is so vital, and while there are good ways that it is included in policymaking exchanges and opportunities, there's just always room for improvement there. I want to start my presentation with two quick caveats. The first one, there's two types of involvement of civil society in policymaking, formal and informal. I'm going to focus on informal. A lot of the reason for that is that formal it can be very specific, it can be very organization based, it can be very based in kind of law or bylaw of particular organizations. Each of the UN agencies has a different methodology for civil society participation. Multilaterals tend to have very specific things. I'll tell you, I was looking at the Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative, or EITI. I was looking at their protocol before this call for civil society participation. It's a 5-page protocol with incredibly specific details about how organizations get brought into the fold. That's also true with governments, domestic governments. I'm sitting here in the United States. We have a comment period around administrative regulations that is a good way for civil society and individuals to play a role in the process, but that's very, very specific. So I'm going to focus on the informal because I think it broadens out the conversation and makes it a lot easier to work across borders, work across different agencies, and work across different organizations. The second caveat, and I already alluded to this, I'm sitting here in the United States. I have worked for the US government. I no longer do, but my frame of reference tends to be the United States. I've worked all over, as Gökçe laid out, but I definitely, as a baseline, have the US policymaking process. So my understanding of it stems from this. So with that having been said, I want to kick things off with, what do policymakers get from involving civil society in the policymaking process? Now, the reason I want to kick things off with that is because I think civil society, generally speaking, wants to play a role in the policymaking process. It is not a particularly hard sell to civil society organizations that it is better for them to engage on how laws are drafted, how laws are made, what laws look like. It can be a slightly larger lift. It can be slightly more difficult to ensure that policymakers understand why it's necessary that civil society organizations are brought into the process. I want to focus on three things. There's a lot of overlap in those three things, but I think each of them is distinct and each of them really sells what civil society organizations can bring to the conversation. The first is context. Civil society organizations are in communities and they're of communities. They're a part of the communities that they work with. They have long-running relationships. They understand the wants and needs of communities down to ultra and hyper-local levels, right? I'm sure everyone on this call is aware of a community organization that operates in the neighborhood they grew up in or the neighborhood they currently reside in. Those are civil society organizations that really understand the needs and wants of that neighborhood, of the people within it, better than government actors ever can. They also have long-term and in-depth understanding of those communities. They're there, they're staying there, they're a part of them. That gets rid of kind of the transient nature of sometimes government actors. That develops trust. Trust will be a huge theme of this part of this presentation. Trust for me is a huge part of civil society relationships with communities. Developing that trust makes them understand things and ensures that they're told things that government actors never will be. I need to stop there for a second and say this is not some sort of intel gathering exercise. Any policymaker that asks civil society organizations to be a source of intelligence is not a good faith actor. But it is a matter of understanding the context. It is a two-way street of the civil society organizations understanding the needs and wants of a community and understanding what to share from that community because it will improve policymaking. It will improve the impact of laws, the impact of regulation, the impact of government decisions on that community. So the first one I wanted to talk about was context. The second one, and again, there's a lot of overlap here, but long-term relationships. Civil society organizations, they're a training ground for future leaders. I don't know the makeup of this call, how many of you are in civil society, how many of you are in school, but all over the globe, civil society serves as a place where people learn to understand the needs and wants of their community, learn to advocate for those needs and wants, learn to be responsive to those needs and wants by providing services, providing assistance, and listening. That tracks really well into future leadership. That tracks really well into future policy engagement. By having relationships with civil society, that builds a long-term relationship with future leaders who may take over in various roles. Never is that more prominent than during upheaval. And I think that is something that gets lost in the policymaking process. If there is a revolution, if there is a civil war, if there's a natural disaster, oftentimes countries and policymakers don't know who to call. They don't know who to reach out to figure out what's going on the ground and how to respond to it. Long-term relationships with civil society build out those relationships and keep you understanding who to call. And often, especially in the context of revolution or transition, countries turn to the most trusted individuals, often whom have worked in civil society. Two very, very easy individuals who come to mind in South Africa when Bishop Desmond Tutu was asked to lead the TRC process. He had been a prominent voice, a prominent member who had the trust of his community and brought that trust to a process of reconciliation that really, really required such trust. And then just recently, when the Bangladeshi student movement overthrew Sheikh Hasina, who did they turn to? Despite the fact that they were very young, they turned to Muhammad Yunus, who's quite a bit older, but had been a trusted representative of civil society for many, many years. I bring up these issues because, from a policymaker perspective, a long-running, ongoing relationship with someone who's turned to because they have the trust of the community in situations of upheaval, in the fog of war, in the chaos of a natural disaster is completely invaluable. You cannot have a better understanding and access to the community. That brings me to my third one, access. As I mentioned a number of times already, civil society is from the community, they're of the community, they speak to the community in a way that governments and policymakers never can. That means that often they are capable of speaking for the needs and wants of a community, but sometimes when they can't, they also know who can, right? I've worked with people very recently who have talked about doing work in particular parts of the globe where they don't know who to speak to. They want to do community engagement, say, for mining projects. They want to speak to communities to understand what that community needs in order to have ongoing and worthwhile engagement from a policy perspective. And they don't know who to reach out to. Now, sometimes that's the local civil society organization, and sometimes it's not. But when it's not, local civil society organizations are far better equipped to talk about who the key stakeholders are, who can speak to the most important issues, and who can speak for the community in a way that it's very difficult without really knowing that community. So again, on the point of what's the value to a policymaker, what does a policymaker need out of this? What does a policymaker require in order to make this relationship valuable? For that, I want to reference two things. The first is consistency. There's a presumption in everything that I've said to you so far that civil society organizations know what they're talking about. They represent a community. They can speak to that community's needs and wants. They can speak to the issues that exist within that community. Policymakers are much less likely to believe that if a civil society organization is constantly bouncing around what community it works with, if it's constantly changing its geographic focus, if it's constantly changing its substantive focus. So consistency breeds that understanding and breeds that trust that allows civil society organizations and their representatives to speak for communities, to speak on these engagements. The second one is in the same vein, but it's far more practical, and that's personnel. If a civil society organization is constantly turning over who works for it, if there's a constant cycle in and out over 6-month periods of who represents that civil society organization, even if the organization itself is staying put and is working on consistent issues and is really developing the trust of the community, policymakers then don't know who to call. So much of this in the informal part is knowing who to call and who to ask, what is needed, what is wanted, and what is going on. I'll say I'm not in a policymaking position right now, but an example that I had just yesterday was an organization that I've done no shortage of work with. I went to email them and found out that everyone that I'd emailed with in that organization is no longer with that organization. And it'd been about 8 months, which is not, an incredibly short period of time, but it's not long either. From a very practical standpoint, from a very pragmatic standpoint, it's just really difficult to be in touch if you don't know who to be in touch with. Now, I want to conclude with what's needed for civil society. How can civil society play a role in these conversations? Because I already talked a lot about why they should, but there is a how. There is a practical, there is a pragmatic element to it. The first one I'd say, and this is very specific to contexts, but an understanding of the policy process. You need to know who's making the laws, who's making the regulations, who's making the policy decisions that impact your community, because they're the ones you need to talk to. You need to ensure that they hear from you about the needs and wants of your community. If you don't know who those stakeholders are, they can't hear from you. And if they need to know, they can't reach out to you either. That also involves the process. You need to know when these decisions have to be made and when in the decision-making process you can be most influential in it. That may be in some contexts when laws are being drafted. That may be in some contexts when policies are initially being discussed. And that may be in some contexts very late in the process when implementation is happening, because implementation will really shape how this looks on a ground level. It's just understanding the individual context of that particular process. The second thing that I think civil society organizations need to engage in the policymaking process, I'll say from a very personal perspective, for me is a lot harder. That is an orientation towards goals. Now, orientation towards goals does not sound like something that is difficult, but underlying in it is that you need to know that you're not going to win every battle. Every conversation on a policy process, every policy-making approach, you are not going to get exactly what you want out of every one of them. You're probably not going to get exactly what you want out of any of them. That means that you need to understand that you have something that you want to accomplish, and long-term engagement is probably better, depending on the context. Long-term engagement is probably better than blowing up the relationship over not getting everything you want in one particular process. That can also include rhetorical flourish, as I'll call it. I don't think I'm breaking any news to anyone on this call that occasionally policymakers and politicians can say things that maybe we don't agree with. I think understanding that the rhetorical flourish can be a part of their job, it doesn't necessarily impact your approach and your goals and your emphasis on what you're trying to accomplish, because it can be very much outside of the policymaking process. Whether or not to maintain those relationships, how to continue along, that's very specific to context, it's very specific to individuals. It is difficult, I'll be the first one to say it, when you lose arguments that you believe very passionately in, or when you hear, a policymaker say something that you fundamentally at your core disagree with. But it requires an understanding that either you can blow up the relationship because of it, or you can continue to work towards a long-term goal. I'll leave it there and we can move towards questions.
Oh, thank you. I was taking notes. Yeah, actually, regarding your presentation, I have some kind of pre-prepared questions, and then I'll give the floor to our participants. Can you tell us, like, an example, for example, what does a long-term relationship between civil society organizations and policymakers kind of look like in practice?
Yeah, thanks for that. I apologize. First off, I apologize. I didn't realize just how shaded I was. I really look like I'm in the background. I moved to a new office a couple weeks ago and apparently have not figured out the lighting in here. So I'm sorry about that.
That's okay.
So the question of what a long-term relationship looks like, I alluded to this in the end of my comments, but I think a long-term relationship has to be mutually beneficial, right? I laid out the value for policymakers. I think it requires consistently re-engaging on that value, right? So there is a normative element of saying that what it is that you are arguing in favor, or what it is that you're researching, or what it is that your community wants and needs is what's necessary. There's a normative element of this is good, a different approach is bad. But much more, resonant amongst policymakers is this is what helps you accomplish your goals. This is what helps in what you're trying to do, and doing what I think is necessary is a part of that. So that give and get, that understanding of the necessity of it being mutually beneficial contributes to the long-term relationship from a very early stage. And then from that early stage, trust develops, right? I mean, trust and an ability to work between actors are vital here. Again, knowing that you won't win every argument, knowing that every policy will not reflect necessarily what you're looking for, knowing that you can work together on the next one. Knowing that you can work together to achieve these goals, that stems out of early relationship building around these are my goals, these are your goals, and they come together over this reason. They are valuable together over this thing. So I would highlight more than anything else the long-term trust and the mutual benefit.
Yeah, but then this brings me to another question. Not saying from example, not from our country. Please don't think about that.
Yeah.
But how does civil society engagement with policymakers function in the context where civic space is really restricted due to, let's say, authoritarian settings?
Yeah. I mean, I'll start by saying that I think closing civic space is the most important issue of our time worldwide. I think, as I laid out a lot, I think that with closing civic space, policymakers are going to have an incredible amount of difficulty understanding what's happening in communities, what are the needs and wants of people. And without that understanding, it leads to bad policy. And that's bad policy even if they want, good policy, or they want policy that is impactful for individuals, which with some policymakers can be a pretty big if. The reason I raise that is I think it leans into that mutually beneficial, even if unexpected ways, right? I'll give an example of some work we did here, and I wrote a piece based on a roundtable conversation we had. There are a lot of civil society organizations that are doing human rights work, that are countering corruption, that are doing work that would easily be seen by policymakers as combative, as trying to take away power from the powerful, or trying to take away power from the government. Without those organizations, it can be very difficult to understand what kind of competitors are doing, right? So the piece I wrote, the conversation that we had, was on the digital Silk Road, which is China's efforts to kind of sell surveillance equipment across the globe, amongst other technologies. And there was an organization that I wrote about in Serbia that was able to research and look into these cameras that they're developing, and it led to this conversation surrounding where are strategic competitors putting their focus, where are strategic competitors aiming their efforts that wouldn't be known but for this human rights organization that was based in Serbia. So the broad goal that existed in the American context was an understanding of what competitors were doing. That wouldn't have existed without support for human rights organizations, without support for countering corruption organizations. So even though it may not have been that the goal of policymakers was to promote human rights or to counter corruption, their work was vital in the achievement of those goals. So I think your point is an incredibly important one on closing civic space, on how to work with a government that doesn't actively believe that civil society organizations should exist or should be able to go on about their approaches. But there is often room there to explain to governments why what it is that you're working on is valuable to things that they find important.
Cool. Thank you. But I'll give the discussion to other people regarding these questions and answers. But then my last question is, as also being part of another civil society organization in Turkey, we are also feeling that or even living that, that civil society area is kind of shrinking. The resources are declining. That's also one of the reasons why we visited US in last year, to understand the context and what's happening, if it's just in Turkey or it's like an international context. And then we're witnessing, we're living it, that it's happening, it's alive. Like, we don't have enough resources, with certain decisions of the some people governing the countries, the world, etc. What do you think about this? Like, what is the future looking like for us as civil society organizations?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I would. Sorry to be honest about that and tell you I don't know. I would actually kind of mesh your last two questions. I think closing civic space. Civicus is an organization that monitors this. They say 7% of the world has open civic space right now, and diminishing resources combined to make it just probably the most terrifying environment, or most difficult environment for civil society it's ever been. From the civic space perspective, the best advocacy, best discussion I can think of is how civil society organizations are invaluable in achieving goals that policymakers do want. From a resources perspective, I don't see a world where it returns to the level of resourcing that existed in the low to medium term, or the short to medium term. I think, very much from a US perspective here, it's difficult to envision a return to the kind of size, the kind of budgets that existed. And even that, I'll say, from a human rights and good governance, democracy perspective, was never particularly substantial in comparison to a lot of other focus areas. I think that where efficiencies can be found are kind of collaboration at the local level. I mean, working around with some of the more administrative costs, but that only gets you so far. I think it is the job of folks like myself, folks in think tanks, folks who work in this space, to ensure that there is an understanding in the U.S. government, in other Western governments, in other donor governments in particular, the value of these things. Because I'll say it's pretty clear to me that was not understood. That doesn't get us all the way to why the resources were changed, or USAID was dismantled, or the State Department's programming was so fundamentally changed. But I do think it's pretty obvious that a lot of people who were responsible for these funds didn't understand what they were getting in return. So I think being able to make that argument is vitally important for the return of some of it. But I think in the short to medium term, we are looking at a different situation, and one that requires a lot of creativity and a lot of innovation, because otherwise these vital services, these vital areas, these vital organizations may have difficulty continuing to exist.
Well, perfect ending to my question, more positive and then creative and innovative. So hopefully we will find some solutions and some ways out of this current situation. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you so much. These are my questions, and I now want to open the floor for the questions, if there are any. We would love to have questions. Please, don't be shy. Let me come to the gallery view so that I can see everyone. Well, actually, it's also time for you to open your cameras, if that's okay for you, so that we can share this time together. We have 40 minutes for questions.
Boksha, I have a question for you. I see your cat over your left shoulder. Can I ask what your cat's name is?
His name is Robin.
Hello, Robin.
And
He looks very comfortable.
he's right. That's his place. There's another one, the little one. She's not around. I kind of fed them so that they can't get naughty just back at the background and, like don't make noise to distract me. So he's happy also because he ate some really good food just, half an hour ago.
Got it. Got it.
That was my strategy.
It's a good strategy. My dog tends to leave me alone after she's eaten as well. It helps.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, don't be shy. I see Daphne from the United States. We've met there. Daphne, how are you?
I'm good. How are you? And hi,
I'm good,
Andrew.
thank you.
Hi,
Glad we know
Daphne.
each other.
Thank
Yeah.
you so much for your presentation. I think it's, especially in these times, I know I'm living in the US, but being from Turkey, it's very kind of interesting learning about both perspectives and kind of having a foot in each world. And with that, I guess I can start with a first question. I was wondering how you think that, and this is kind of something that like my peers and I talk about a lot, is how we can kind of remain hopeful and I know, Andrew, you were saying that a lot of the times you aren't really going to get most even of what you're asking for, but it's still important to keep the relationship and to keep going. But how do you think that in Turkey and in the US where, obviously things are different in the political context, but I feel like the morale may be a little bit similar in some ways with people kind of not being too hopeful. So I was wondering from your experience, and I know you're a lawyer, obviously, and that kind of like, I feel like law and international human rights law is one of the most concrete ways that I've observed of like making change and kind of feeling hopeful in that. But how do you think that like regular people and like students and everyone can kind of remain hopeful in these times where it feels like things aren't really, going the way that we would hope?
Thank you so much for that, Daphne. Let me start by just saying, because you said I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here and say that because you and your peers talk about it a lot, I'd love to hear kind of any solutions that you all have come up with, because I think we can all use a very full menu for those these days. But I can tell you what works for me, but I think a long list of them for folks would always be helpful. So let's say something real quick, but I'll put you on the spot afterwards if that's okay. So it can be very, very difficult, and like don't let me lie to you and say that it's very easy and it's super simple to stay hopeful. For me, what works more than anything else is I've been lucky enough to work with a lot of people who continue doing it, even if they don't feel hopeful that day, even if they feel sick that day, even if, I've worked in a lot of places that are fragile or conflict affected, and, I've worked with no shortage of people who have lost loved ones, who have been attacked or injured themselves, or are in insecure situations. When I have days that I don't feel hopeful or don't feel like trying to push human rights forward, what works for me is to remind myself that if they can, I can. That's not always easy, and it's not necessarily for everyone, but being able to remind myself that it's an important issue that people keep trying to work on, even in the most dire of situations, it forces me to level set. That all having been said, Goksha and I just talked about our pets. I spend a lot of the end of the day petting my dog, trying to get myself back to zero, right? That is important for me to remain hopeful and remain able to do the work. But I think what keeps me going, what keeps me hopeful, is having worked around and continuing to work around so many people that have remained with a steadfast hope, even in situations where it is immensely difficult, bordering on impossible. So
I can also jump in here for a quick comment.
please.
We've been talking to one of the former government representatives in Turkey a few months back, and he's a very charismatic person, well educated, and then at the end of our conversation, he was like, well, now we're preparing ourselves for 10 years later, maybe not for tomorrow, not for next week, not for next month, but things gonna be changing. So let's get prepared from now on and then change the world when it's the time. Because in 10 years of a time, no one will be really ready for changing the world, but we will be ready because we want it so badly. This always gives me hope. And then when I talk to younger people, like students at the university or even among my friends, I always remind myself this as a kind of anchor point for hope, let's say. So I just wanted to bring this here too, actually.
Yeah, that's an incredibly important point. Things like this are so helpful for maintaining hope, right? I mean, apologies if I'm getting my time zones wrong, but I think it's like pretty close to 6 p.m. in Istanbul, right around there. And, it's a random Wednesday evening, and a lot of young people, you all are taking your early evenings to listen to me talk about civil society and policy making. There's a lot of other things that you could be doing that I'm sure are more fun or more interesting than myself. So that really helps. Really helps. Daphne, can I put you on the spot? Anything we missed? Anything that comes up with you in your?
Yes, for sure. I think, well, especially on the topic of, and thank you so much, both of you, for your answers. I think on the topic of like talking about the environment, for example, which is kind of one of the big kind of, topics that we talk about as kind of, it's an area where I feel like people do require we need some hope. I think, the projections and everything can be very stressful, and like obviously wars have a terrible impact on the environment, and that's something that is just not really recognized. I feel like when we talk about like the impact of war and just like military operations in general, like we don't really consider the impact on the environment, or like it can be too politicized, which it really shouldn't be. It's just we're talking about like how like a bomb could obviously hurt the environment. And then I think my friends and I were talking about how like we went to a cafe and they had plastic straws, and the whole conversation around plastic straws and holding like individuals accountable for the climate crisis, or which you could argue was it like designed that way to kind of maybe draw accountability away from bigger working forces and make people feel like, oh, if I don't use a plastic, or if I use a plastic straw, like I'm at fault and I'm contributing, which of course like that does have an impact, but talking more about like the overall bigger impact with like things like war, when like this current context I feel like is very relevant to mention. But yeah, just talking about things like that with my peers. And I think I agree with you, Andrew, that the fact that, obviously I am in the US as well, but the fact that people take time out of their day and keep like wanting to have these conversations and keep wanting to work on these things. I think for young people, it's very, very inspiring to see people like you all, like at Kalkınmaya that keep, pushing this work forward no matter the context. I can't imagine a world in which like everyone kind of stopped what they were doing when they felt like, it wasn't having the right impact. So I think for me, it's just been about having people that I look up to, and you all on this call are definitely some of those people. And I was lucky enough to see the work that you were doing, Andrew, at CSIS when I was interning there as well. And yeah, just like reading the reports from Kalkınmaya and everything, it's just, I think that all just keeps us going. Like that's a lot of what my friends and I have been talking about, just staying kind of blurring out the noise, because I think eventually like we have to I think there's definitely an end to what feels like this kind of crazy period, because it's in everyone's best interest, right, to stay hopeful and also turn the tide with what's going on in Turkey and the US and just all over the world. But yeah, so that's not a very straightforward answer, but a lot of what my peers and I have been talking about, and reading a lot of books, like historical books, and kind of getting our facts and making sure we can make our arguments based on like real historical context.
Well, maybe Daphne, then if you can share the books that you're recommending to, our participants, if you can put their names on the chat, maybe then people can get inspired about that. And also, Andrew, can you tell us how we can reach out to your contacts? Where are you writing, and how we can read I'm following you on LinkedIn and I get to see your publications, but if you can, share maybe in the chat or just, say it out loud, then our people can also follow you for further context and then maybe get in touch with you.
Yeah, happy to. First, let me respond to Daphne's comment. So, just thank you for that. Like that was immensely appreciated. Just thank you. I want to say, just very much to the hope and to Coach's comments about speaking to young people. I think the fact that you and friends walk into a cafe and notice the plastic straws and want to do something to make the world a better place, don't ever undersell the importance of that, right? Like don't ever undersell the fact that you all walk in and there's a million things you could notice, a beautiful painting on the wall, how good or bad the coffee is, the tea selection, whatever it is. But the fact that you look and you see that it's served with a plastic straw and you're like, oh, I'd rather not use this because it's a problem for the environment. Like never understand or never diminish how important that everyday understanding of little steps to make the world a better place, how much that helps and how much it helps that hope roll down the hill. It helps inspire. In terms of my work, my writing, I'm happy to drop it in the chat. Goksha, like as you mentioned, LinkedIn is great, but I can also drop the Human Rights Initiative at CSIS, which can run through the work that we're doing here. That includes a lot of writing. It includes some videos and gatherings. Try as often as we can to put stuff out, and then I've been doing. Should come out today. I've been doing a monthly director's note that kind of lays out what I've been thinking about, what we've been working on, and just some interesting other readings that hopefully people pay attention to or strike me in a particular way. But I can drop all that in the chat.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, actually, right after this, within the next month, I'll be preparing, like the keynotes from this, from today's webinar, and we will be publishing them in our website and also in a Substack page that we're just recently going to create. So there will be more information, like written information. Of course, I'll get back to you, Andrew, for the context check, let's say. And then after all webinars, we're planning to publish key takeaways and, summary of all these things that we discussed, and maybe potential recommendations or next steps if it's possible. I see Gül Aran has a question. Can you unmute yourself and bring that? I think I'm not sure if I understand the question properly. Maybe the impact measurement methodology has to be redefined and more financial and administrative support will be allocated to follow-up participants.
I can jump in. I think I understand it, but go definitely jump in and interrupt me if I'm misunderstanding the question, if you're still online. So impact measurement, monitoring, and evaluation, they're incredibly important, especially in an environment where there's so much focus on return on investment for development work, human rights work. Again, to that broader question of a lack of understanding of kind of what people get or what policymakers get out of this. I think there is a lot of value in refining impact measurements and in ensuring that monitoring and evaluation works towards doing the work the best that it can be done, and it constantly improving, right? I mean, I think there is a real value to that, but I don't think that people who are broadly against human rights work, broadly against countering corruption work, or even broadly against development work, they may say that their objection is, we don't know how successful it is. We don't know, the monitoring evaluation or the impact evaluation, impact measurement was not good enough. So we don't have statistics. I think you can run into a little bit of a bad faith argument there. Gökçe mentioned I worked at USAID before I came to CSIS, and there was a pretty robust effort at monitoring and evaluation with USAID. The reporting requirements were very substantial. There was a lot of effort of oversight in the U.S. policymaking process, very much including Congress, very much including approvals of money in Congress, and responding to reports. Like there was a very multifaceted and robust effort at monitoring evaluation, and that didn't change a lot of the responses of those people who are rhetorically opposed to this kind of work. So that's a bit of a meandering response, but I think the answer is that is really, really important to make sure the work is constantly getting better. But I'm not sure that monitoring and evaluation or impact measurements methodologically has the ability to move the needle from a policy perspective. I think that I hate to say it this way, but I think it's the reality. I think if you compare monitoring and evaluation between development work and defense work, monitoring and evaluation of development work is far more robust, far more substantial than ever in the defense sector, and the same questions are not raised about the defense sector.
Wow, that was heavy. Thank you. I think Gül is not here anymore, but thanks for answering, Andrew. Maybe she can follow up on YouTube later on. Any questions, everyone?
Hello, Gökçe. Maybe I can ask a small question before you finish.
Yes.
Hello, my name is Selin. Hello, Andrew. I am happy. I am very happy listening to you right now. And I want to ask you a question. I think it could be conceptual question actually, but I'm really wonder really there is particular policy areas where civil society tends to have the greatest impact. Do you know about any area, or maybe you can mention from your experiences or observations?
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. I think that's a really important question. I think this goes a little bit back to Gul's comment or Gul's question. It probably depends how you define impact. So I think the most tangible impacts often come out of say, the health sector. I mean, if you think of folks who are doing development work, who are doing civil society work in the health sector, oftentimes they're doing things like vaccinating neighborhoods, vaccinating communities, right? Like there's not a lot that is more tangible, that is more universally good than the idea of providing medicines or providing, vaccines to a community, right? So that is incredibly impactful. It's immediate. The people that you're helping are standing right in front of you, and they're very aware that is impactful, that is helpful. So that tangibility is vital, right? It is very in your face that there's that impact, that there is that success. When you talk about more kind of ethereal topics, countering corruption, I think, is a good example, because oftentimes a win for folks who are combating against corruption is just that corruption doesn't happen anymore. So you don't see that tangible, the person standing in front of you who has helped, or that thing. That, in my mind, and I'm happy to be disagreed with here, but in my mind, that's no less impactful. It's just it's far less tangible. So I think civil society work can be incredibly impactful across sectors, across efforts, and across policy spheres. It's just some are far more tangible. I mean, if your focus area, if your passion is providing medicine, that is wonderful. It's incredible. It's important, and the person is standing in front of you. But if your passion is promoting human rights, combating corruption, it might be far less tangible. There's obviously, that's a broad continuum. That's a broad area. But I think where that happens is where the impact is really important to determining, whether you see something as immediately impactful or long run impactful, or difficult to measure how impactful it is. I would say, moving forward, kind of as we think about what the future looks like, to Goksha's question around civic space and questions around resourcing, there might be a lot more room to do things in priority or in areas that align with priorities of government. I say that not to, tell people not to pursue human rights work or countering corruption work. I just say that most governments are not going to be opposed in principle to you helping a neighborhood get better medicine. Most governments are not going to be opposed in principle to you opening up a small civil society organization that provides education for young children, right? Like that, those are things that align with the priorities of most governments, both at the local and state or subnational and national level. That doesn't mean that the stuff that doesn't align with priorities doesn't need to be done, right? I mean, human rights work, countering corruption work, whistleblower protection work, these are things that need to be done, but there might be a lot less space for it. So it might be harder to make impact in a direct manner than these ways that align with priorities. as we move forward in this world of closing civic space, less resources, etc.
Thank you.
Thank you.
But do you mean that during this survival period, we just pick certain topics to work on it and then bring the real stuff after everything is more available?
I hope that's not the answer. I really hope that's not the answer. But I think that we're in a world where local priorities are going to drive resourcing, are going to drive a lot of funding and resourcing, as I mentioned, and in a world where civic space is closing, governments choose what organizations to crack down on, and I think history would show that they're far more likely to crack down on organizations that are doing work that they don't want done than they are to crack down on organizations that they are doing work that they want done.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Message taken. All right. Any questions, people? I see we have some international guests as well. Not only Turkish people. I see some non-Turkish names. Can I encourage you to bring your voice to this area, actually?
Hello. Hi.
Hi.
I'm Anixoara. I'm from Romania, and currently I'm an Erasmus student at Çukurova at the medicine faculty. And I thank you for this opportunity. I can't wait to learn as much as I can.
Perfect. Thank you. So you said you're in Çukurova, right? For medicine.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. We're coming to Çukurova a lot, actually. Adana, Mersin. So stay tuned. We can meet there in person.
That would be great. Thank you.
Yeah. Let's keep in touch.
Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for introducing yourself as well. I encourage other people to do that too. And this is a safe space, people.
I also just shared some of the books I've been reading in the chat as well, and would welcome any recommendations from other people.
Thank you. I'm willing to add them to our Substack post as well, so as a resource. If you have more resources, we can always add them. Thanks for sharing, Daphne.
Thank you.
Okay.
I haven't read the new Naomi Klein book, but I'm a huge fan of hers. So I'll check it out. Thanks, Daphne.
Yeah, it's great. I just started reading it, but I also am a huge fan, so.
Perfect.
We're nearing time a little bit. Does it make sense to just kind of start wrapping up?
Yeah, actually, I was just gonna say that I tried to take some notes based on your presentation. Can I just use them for wrapping up? I'm gonna repeat what you said. I just wrote them, so let me bring them here.
Sounds great.
So let's go. Thank you very much, Andrew, for this rich and really thoughtful conversations. And then, as a person who has been working in civil society organizations for a long time, that was really precious for me to understand that also, and to share it with other people. Let me check my notes. So what today's conversation has shown is that the value of civil society in policymaking is not abstract, and it's deeply practical based on your perspective. So civil society brings context, access, and long-term relationships that policymakers often do not have on their own. And without these, policies risk being disconnected from the realities they are meant to address. And at the same time, this relationship is not automatic. From a policymaker perspective, as you said, it requires consistency and continuity. So from a civil society perspective, it requires a clear understanding of policy progresses, laws and legislations and everything, and stakeholders, and a long-term orientation towards goals, even when the progress is not immediate. So kind of stay in that and then be patient. And we also touched upon more difficult contexts where civic space is kind of restricted. So in such settings, the absence of civil society does not eliminate the need for it. It simply makes policymaking weaker and less informed. So we need to, let our policymakers understand the real value of civil society based on this information. And looking ahead, in a world of shrinking civic space right now and declining resources, the role of civil society will not become less important, but more. The challenge will be to continue demonstrating its value while also adapting with creativity, resilience, and new forms of collaboration in those survival times. And I strongly recommend all civil society representatives to follow your work, because you are working on that really a lot. So to bring the value, to underline the value of civil society in time. And perhaps the key takeaway can be that meaningful change does not come from one-off interactions, but from trust built over time. And that trust is what ultimately gonna enable us both better policies and stronger societies. And then one day we're gonna change things. So we just, again, gotta be patient and try to survive and do better stuff. Is that correct, Andrew? Is it a good wrap-up?
That was fantastic. I appreciate you wrapping it up like that. From my side, just let me say thank you for letting me be a part of this. I'm so excited that you all are doing it. It is a wonderful idea, a wonderful workshop, wonderful series, and I'm elated that you let me be a part of it. So thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us. We're grateful to having you also as our first expert in this series. And I want to say that, please stay tuned for upcoming webinars. We're going to have more webinars. We're planning to have 12 webinars in total until the end of the year. So stay tuned. Times, dates can be changed. That's why you need to follow us. And thank you for participating, for joining, and have a great rest of your day. I don't know which time zone you are in, but, it's evening for us. So good evening, good night, good afternoon, good morning, and hope to see you again next month. And please don't forget to register for the upcoming events. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Meryem, we can stop the recording. Kayıtı durdurabiliriz Meryem.